Okay, so I spin down the diode in counterclockwise, calibrate the fiber socket. There, my dimensional portal I ordered from the back of a Spawn comic book is complete. You know, I've been having very little luck getting back of that fucking elephant. Just wasn't anybody I could reliably trust. Then I realized there is one person. Myself. Imagine an army of Dylan Dan Hawks teaming together to take on a great evil. Just like my favorite movie. Multiplicity, starring Michael Keaton. Anyway, let's boot it up. Sweet Betsy, where am I? The fuck are you? I'm Dylan Dan Hawk, of course. Dylan Dan... You look like Doug Dimmadome. Why am I Texan in your universe? Well, at least I look presentable. You look like a sewer rat that fell into a vat of Axe body spray while cosplaying Columbo. Well, you look like if Wilford Brimley lost 60 pounds and became a porn actor. Why is your nose glowing? All noses glow in my universe. It's kind of Chris Grine's thing. At least I'm an original drawing and not some stock image. An old stock image too, like GeoCities old. Asshole. Ding dong. You want to make out? You know it. Alright, it's that time of year again. Time for our annual Animorphs graphic novel fix. And for me, Animorphs number 3 The Encounter is the make or break point for this project. In the original books, number 1 The Invasion was a large story compressed into a small form factor, with tons of setup and world building and character introductions, while still finding the time for an action-heavy climax. There were still many kinks to work out in the premise, a level of uncertainty as to what Kay Applegate could get away with, and as such, it comes off a bit bloated and odd compared to the rest of the series. Number 2 The Visitor pulled things back into a smaller, more simple story, exploring the harm of the Yeerk invasion on a very micro-personal level. Though perhaps it made things too simple, with a very after-school special approach of domestic issues, and it totally flubbed its mandatory action climax. Number 3 The Encounter is, in my opinion, when the series found firm footing in its tone and pacing. It is, predominantly, a character piece about Tobias dealing with the dissociative trauma of being stuck in the form of a red-tailed hawk, a conflict of identity as Tobias finds it harder and harder to live by human standards. It uses its science fiction premise in intelligent, thoughtful ways, and it goes to some dark places. This is the book where Tobias has a nervous breakdown and attempts to commit suicide. That moment was a crossing of the threshold for the series. There were violent moments in the first 2 books, there were darker implications, but when one of your protagonists has a dissociative episode and attempts to kill himself, that's when you know this wasn't some silly children's nonsense. This wasn't Power Rangers. This was a serious book series that presented difficult topics to a young demographic and didn't shy away from it. The graphic novel adaptations by Chris Grine have carried over a lot of the issues of the first 2 books, as to be expected, but have also had their own set of growing pains as they figured out how to translate some very wordy prose into a visual medium. The graphic novels have been good, but occasionally bogged down by floods of word balloons and a rigid loyalty to the book's format, meaning times where it might have been useful to cut to another character's perspective are absent. That's all been very understandable and really not that big of a deal, but it does mean that Grine has his work cut out for him with this third outing, where large chunks of it are entirely Tobias's inner monologue, him narrating through the issues of his mental health and psychological breakdown. So let's just jump right into that. Does the graphic novel adaptation of number 3 The Encounter do Tobias's inner conflict and mental break well? And the answer is yes! I'm happy to report that not only is it true to the original book, it also finds really interesting ways to present the inner conflict visually. So let's break it down. First off, Intrusive Thoughts. Tobias didn't really have them in the original book. He had more of a general depression with building desperation. The graphic novel modifies some of this inner monologue as sudden negative moments, and it communicates this visually. Tobias's intrusive thoughts are represented by black word bubbles, and in most of these moments, there's a fractured line splitting Tobias in two, covering part of Tobias's world in dark, muted colors. The more intrusive the thought, the more his world is turned bleak. It also represents the duality of Tobias's identity, the humanity he clings to, and the animal instincts that claw at him. This is great. This is using the visual strengths of the graphic novel format well, using them to communicate Tobias's internal narrative. And then we finally get to the moment when Tobias gives in. After weeks of malnutrition and loneliness and being trapped in his own head, Tobias is flying over a field, and he spots a mouse. For 2 pages, we get something very rare for the Animorphs graphic novels: images without words, as Tobias flies in and snatches his prey. There's no thought bubbles, there's no intrusive thoughts, because Tobias isn't even thinking. He's flying around, minding his own business, probably checked out from the world like you might be when you're driving a car, and without anger, without malice, without feeling, Tobias kills a mouse and starts eating it. And when Tobias realizes what's happening, what he's done, bam! Tobias's world shatters in a 2-page spread. This is, in my opinion, the most visually intense and interesting piece of art Chris Grine has put into his Animorphs trilogy. Violent and disorienting and distressing. A beautiful mess. Like, seriously, bravo! I love this. This is fantastic. My biggest worry about this book going in was that it wouldn't find a way to visualize such an introspective story, and those worries were very misplaced. Grine was ready for the assignment. Which leaves everything else, and it's, well, business as usual, in a I'm worried these annual videos are going to be annoyingly repetitive kind of way. As in the previous 2 books, the morphing sequences are amazing works of body horror. As in the previous 2 books, it's so beholden to the original prose that you will get walls of text at time. As in the previous 2 books, the designs of the aliens, sci-fi tech, and especially in this case the spaceships, are all top-notch, the enormous carrier ship being another winner. As in the previous 2 books, the action sequences don't track as well as I think they should. It worked okay in the invasion finale because that was just a chaotic brawl, but the visitors finale needed a bit more focus and clarity. There isn't a lot of action in the encounter, but what's there doesn't read easily. Okay, so you have Tobias trapped on top of the carrier ship, surrounded by taxons. Tobias makes a dive at one of the taxons and steals its Dracon beam. So far, so good. Visor 3 orders the ship to activate its cloaking mechanism. Then, on the next page, we get 2 nearly identical panels of 2 taxons speaking gibberish, and then a shot of Tobias above them. Now, here's the problem. Maybe I'm just an idiot, but this sequence really confused me on first read, because we go from a scene of Tobias above a group of taxons, and then a page later, we go to a scene of Tobias above a second group of taxons, and I didn't realize these were different taxons. Not at first. This second group is inside the ship, and we see them now because the ship is cloaked. But there's very little to visually distinguish this interior of the ship from the exterior that we were just present at. There's these computer things, but that could just as easily be part of the exterior, and we still have the evening sky as the background. Wait, so the cloaking turns the interior walls transparent too? You have to fly around like that? Well, that seems unpleasant and vertigo-inducing. Yes, Visor 3 did give the command to activate the cloaking mechanism, but we don't see them actually activating the cloaking mechanism. A panel with the ship in transition, half cloaked, would have done wonders to communicate what's going on, and they had space for it, because what is even the point of those 2 taxon panels? This feels like a mistake. Like maybe in the first panel we were supposed to see the taxons inside the ship with metal paneling behind them, and then in the next we see the background change to the sky, telling us that the cloaking mechanism turned on, and they just forgot to put the backgrounds into these panels? I can't think of any other reason why these 2 copy and pasted taxons are here. This guy's hat says derp. This isn't a deal breaker or anything, I figured it out with a second read through, But if these graphic novel adaptations are going to get much deeper into the series, when we start to introduce tail blade fights and Rachel beating people to death with severed arms and Cassie ripping out a Hork-Bajir's throat, then Grine is going to have to step up his action scenes. He's good at the exposition, he's good at character moments, he's great at the art. Again, he absolutely nailed Tobias's trauma. But when it comes time to wreck some shit, he's not quite there yet. Here's hoping. Another odd detail we can talk about so that this isn't a depressingly short video is this scene when the Animorphs morph into wolves for the first time. And we get this exchange between Jake and Cassie about the sexes of their new wolf morphs. Wouldn't two males just fight for dominance or something? Actually, they debunked the alpha wolf and the wolf pack theory. It's an interesting problem, isn't it? Because in the original book, first published in 1996, it presents wolf pack hierarchy, with alpha wolves and all that jazz, as legit science, because, at the time, it was believed to be the legit science. Just one of the ways art can become outdated sometimes. That's fine, that's understandable. But what do you do when you're retelling the story? For example, the reprints from 2011, well after the alpha wolf idea had been debunked, literally by the guy who wrote the book on it in the first place. In this version, the erroneous alpha wolf stuff is intact, and you might say, well, that's just a reprint, warts and all. But the entire Animorphs reprint project was about updating Animorphs, modernizing the book's technology and pop culture references in hopes to find a new batch of young readers. We'll change the slang from take a pill to chill out, but the alpha wolf stuff stays. Surely Cassie would be using outdated animal information. Since 2011, the whole alpha thing has gained a lot of strange baggage. People have taken this well outdated science, and half of those people use it to justify gross misogynistic behavior, and the other half use it to come up with just the most wild erotic fanfiction premises. It's gotten weird, and finally ditching it for the graphic novel is well justified. Except now it's anachronistic, because at this point it's clear that the graphic novels are taking place in the 1990s. They haven't been obvious period pieces. We never see the Animorphs watching TRL or talking about the O.J. Simpson trial or drinking a surge. It's more a period piece by omission. The absence of modern things like cell phones and flat-screen televisions and the underlying sense of dread that humanity is in a death spiral from climate disaster and low-key fascism pulls the graphic novel away from now and puts it in a vague-ish back then. The most obvious example in this book is how, when Tobias flies into the mall, everyone has these small film cameras and not the latest iPhone. Oh boy, there's a sale at Banjo Depot! So yeah, the Alpha Wolf is debunked line is anachronistic. But also, I'd have done the same thing. I also would have had anachronistic moments rather than continue to spread the myth of alpha wolves to the children reading the book, especially in these weird times of alpha males and omega verses. It was the right call. Just, it's interesting to talk about. And with that, we should probably wrap things up. Post-book follow-up. Yeah, I'm finding fewer and fewer things to say with each one of these graphic novels. We're 3 in, and they're pretty consistent with each other. What works and what doesn't work have remained pretty much the same in all 3 entries. All that's changed is the underlying book it's adapting, and since the encounter stands head and shoulders over the previous 2, the graphic novel adaptation does as well. Chris Grine knew what was important here, knew what he had to put the focus on. He knew he had to get Tobias' mental breakdown right, and he knocked it out of the park. And for that, everything else is just window dressing. The actual plot with the carrier ship is presented in a straightforward way. The art does its best to make Tobias emote through his frozen hawk face. Ah! And hey, we got graphic novel Dealing Dan Hawk, which is all I've ever wanted in life. I liked it. I might even say I loved it. And I'm glad this project is still going strong. I give Animorphs Graphix number 3 The Encounter an 8 out of 10.